Chuck Schumer just broke over 200 years of Senate tradition, and nobody in the mainstream media is talking about it. Democrats are blocking every single one of President Trump's nominees, and Senator Tom Cotton just exposed how deep this obstruction goes. Stick around, because I'm about to break down exactly how the left is sabotaging our government and how Republicans are ready to fight back.
Question, and then 2 hours of debate, and then another vote on confirmation. They were voice voted, or they were adopted by what's called unanimous consent of the Senate for over 200 years. You can see the evidence here in front of me in this chart. This is the percentage of civilian nominees who have been confirmed by voice vote or by unanimous consent going back to George Bush 41 and to today, President Trump's second term, through about the first 6 months of the administration. George Bush 41, 98%. Bill Clinton. Some people thought Bill Clinton's presidency started a more polarized politics. Nope, 98% for Bill Clinton as well. George W. Bush, Bush 43. Well, it's a 5x increase in the number of record votes we needed, but still 90%. I would note that Senator Schumer was elected in 1998, so he showed up here about 2 years before George W. Bush did. Obama, despite the treatment of George W. Bush by the Democratic senators, stayed steady at 90%. 90% of all of Barack Obama's nominees through his first 6 months were confirmed by voice vote or unanimous consent. Look at this huge drop here. From 90% for Barack Obama to not even 2/3 for Donald Trump in his first term. And yes, it does decline by another 8% to Joe Biden. As is often said, what goes around comes around. The shoe will be on the other foot, and you might not like how it feels. But look now at the unprecedented break from the customs of the Senate under these Senate Democrats and Chuck Schumer, from 57% to zero. Zero. Not a single one. Not a single nominee of Donald Trump's have been confirmed by voice vote or by unanimous consent in the first 6+ months of his administration. A totally unprecedented blockade. And we're not talking about the Secretary of Defense or the Secretary of the Treasury. Again, we're talking about jobs like the Chief Counsel for Advocacy at the SBA. I bet most of you didn't even know that job existed. They do important work, but does the Senate really need to spend 2 hours and 2 votes on it? I would suggest not, based on historical customs. So when did this all start? When did it happen? Did it happen when TV cameras got in the Senate and senators could come down here and perform for the TV camera? No. In fact, there's ample examples and precedent of highly controversial nominations, not even requiring a 60-vote threshold. Think about Clarence Thomas, maybe the best example. Clarence Thomas in 1991, the most consequential nomination we consider, a lifetime appointment to the Supreme Court of the United States. One of the most, if not the most, controversial nominees in history because of the lies and calumnies that Democratic senators made against him, I would add. He was confirmed on a record vote of 52 to 48. Now you may say, well, how did he get confirmed? He didn't have 60 votes. And that's because as late as 1991, it was considered unprecedented for a senator to require what we call a cloture motion, a motion to end debate at a 60-vote threshold on a nominee, on any nominee, to include a Supreme Court justice. Think about some of the senators who were here in 1991, who could have, on their own accord, irrespective of the wishes of another 99 senators, demanded that Clarence Thomas get 60 votes before he be confirmed. Teddy Kennedy, Robert Byrd, Joe Biden, John Kerry, lions of the Democratic Senate. Not a single one of them came down here and said, I want to demand a 60-vote threshold for Clarence Thomas. Maybe there were conversations about it, but maybe people like Teddy Kennedy and Robert Byrd said, we don't do that. That's not the way things are done here. Until 1999, when Chuck Schumer shows up. And he and other liberals in the Senate and a bunch of liberal law professors begin circulating the idea, no, we should require 60-vote thresholds for nominees. And then a couple years into the Bush administration, they began to demand it, most notably on nominees to the Court of Appeals for the D.C. Circuit, and most notably of all those, on Miguel Estrada, a young Latino lawyer that they were afraid George Bush was going to later elevate to be the first Latino on the Supreme Court. They took unprecedented actions, and that, led by Chuck Schumer, is what brought us to this moment today. That's one reason why this says 90% and not 98%. By 2013, Harry Reid, then Majority Leader of the Senate, voted to change the rules of the Senate and said there will no longer be 60-vote thresholds on any office other than the Supreme Court. He did it right there at that desk. Mitch McConnell stood at that desk, then the Republican leader, and said, what goes around comes around. The shoe may be on the other foot, and it may be there sooner than you might think. And sure enough, 4 years later, in 2017, Republicans used the Harry Reid precedent and extended it to the Supreme Court. So now Supreme Court nominees, as was the case throughout history, only require a simple majority vote. And then the Democrats engaged in the dilatory practices that they're using now, which is why this number was at 65, to demand 30 hours of debate. And I say 30 hours of debate in air quotes because nobody comes down here in those times and debates the nominee pending on the floor. They talk about climate change.
Welcome back to Jace Manhwa. Before we get into it, make sure you hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you don't miss the truth the mainstream media won't tell you. I just finished watching Senator Tom Cotton on the Senate floor, and I've got to tell you, what he laid out is something every single American needs to hear. The Senate is holding a rare Saturday session, and it's not because they're suddenly working overtime for the people. No, it's because of one man, Chuck Schumer. The Democrats have been deliberately obstructing President Trump's nominees, creating a blockade that has completely broken with over 200 years of Senate tradition. For decades, nearly all nominees, 98% under George H.W. Bush and Bill Clinton, 90% under George W. Bush and even Barack Obama, were confirmed by voice vote or unanimous consent. That means no drawn-out debate, no procedural games, just straightforward confirmations. But when Trump came into office, that number dropped to 0. Not a single nominee was allowed through without a fight. We're not even talking about high-profile positions like Secretary of Defense. We're talking about low-level jobs that most Americans don't even know exist, positions that have historically been approved without controversy. And who's behind this unprecedented blockade? Chuck Schumer. He came into the Senate in 1999 and immediately started pushing the idea of 60-vote thresholds for nominations, an idea that had never been the standard in the history of the Senate. Even during the confirmation of Clarence Thomas, one of the most controversial Supreme Court nominations in U.S. history, no one demanded a 60-vote threshold. Not Ted Kennedy, not Joe Biden, not any of the Democratic heavyweights of that era. But Schumer changed all of that. Fast forward to 2013, Harry Reid and the Democrats blew up the rules entirely, ending the 60-vote requirement for nearly all nominees. And then in 2017, Republicans followed that precedent for Supreme Court picks. Now, instead of voice votes and efficiency, Democrats are forcing hours of pointless debate where no real debate even happens. They just run out the clock while our government grinds to a halt. Senator Cotton is right. Republicans have options. They can remove these delays, eliminate procedural roadblocks, or even allow President Trump to use recess appointments to fill these positions. The Democrats can either return to tradition and end this obstruction, or they can keep pushing until Republicans change the rules entirely. This is why elections matter. This is why we cannot allow the radical left to keep rewriting the rules whenever it benefits them. Schumer broke Senate tradition, and now he's shocked that Republicans are ready to fight back. As Cotton said, one way or another, this ends. Either Democrats back down, or Republicans will finish what Schumer started and restore the Senate to the way it worked for over 200 years. If you're tired of Democrats playing games with our government, if you're ready to see the Senate return to sanity, make sure you share this video. Like it, subscribe to Jace Manhwa, and help us spread the word. The American people need to know the truth about how the left is breaking our institutions from the inside out.